This happened when I was a pizza delivery driver for Domino's. I worked there for about 6 months when I was in college. I would drive my old Honda around the city that I lived in, and I made decent money for being in school. Most of the time, I would work nights, and we would sometimes get really busy, so I had a lot of deliveries to make. This story takes place one late Friday night. I was working until 2 a.m., and after midnight, things did quiet down a little bit. So then I got a delivery to make at probably a little after 1. I got the address and then went to my car and put in the directions. It was 9 minutes away, I remember seeing. When I arrived, I remembered that the neighborhood was pretty dark. There were not many lights around, and it seemed like townhouses to me. They went along this street, and on the other side of it was a random parking lot and then just grass and some woods. I parked on the side of the road and walked up to the building. It was about 2 or 3 stories high and looked pretty old. When I arrived at the front door, I realized that the house I was supposed to deliver to was upstairs. It was sort of like an apartment building, so I opened up the door and walked in. Immediately to the left was a door leading to one unit, and then there was a staircase straight ahead. I saw the unit I was supposed to deliver to was 209, and that was upstairs. So I walked up the narrow and long staircase to the top. When I got there, there was literally just a door to my left and then another door in front of me. 209 was the one in front of me. The person who ordered the pizza had not yet paid, so I would need to get the money from them. I knocked on the door, expecting them to answer, but they didn't answer right away. I knocked again and then waited. Probably a minute went by, and things were very quiet. But then I heard the door downstairs open, the one that I had come through. There were 2 men, and they were both wearing all black, including ski masks. I thought it was really weird. They both looked up at me, and then started to walk up the stairs. Now I knew that I was in trouble, and I had no idea as to what to do. They were getting closer as they walked up the staircase. Right as they reached the top, it was obvious that they were going for me. I tried opening up the door to unit number 209, but it was locked. Then I didn't know what else to do. I just tossed the pizza, still in its box, in the direction of the guys. Then I looked over the railing next to me. There was a walkway beneath me next to the stairs. I believe it just led to another apartment unit on the ground level. So I climbed over the wall and railing, which was maybe 5 feet high. Then I jumped down. I did it just before the men reached me. The fall was probably about 20 feet if I had to guess, maybe a little more. My feet hit the ground first, and it really hurt. I remember I fell over, but for the most part I was fine. I sprung to my feet and ran for the door. When I was doing this, I heard the men start to go down the staircase after me. I ran as quickly as I could out of the building and back to my car. When I got inside, I didn't waste any time and I drove away. I didn't look to see if the men were still chasing after me or not. All I knew was that they didn't catch me and I had gotten away. I drove back to Domino's and then ran inside and told my boss what happened. He asked me if I called the police, and I realized then that I hadn't. So I called the police and told them what happened. Luckily, I didn't get in any trouble despite the fact that the pizza was never paid for. As it turns out, the 209 unit that I was supposed to deliver to was vacant and nobody lived there. I had been set up by somebody, but I never found out who. I worked there for just about another month before quitting. This happened about a year ago when I was delivering for DoorDash. I delivered for them quite a bit, and I live near a city, so there are lots of restaurants nearby. When this story took place, I was delivering on foot. I would walk to apartments and houses in the city and deliver. I couldn't cover that much ground delivering on foot, obviously, but I still did surprisingly well most of the time. One time I was working and it was nighttime. Things were pretty quiet, but I was still getting some deliveries. I got one that was for some smoothies from like a health drink place. I remember that I went to the place and picked up the orders. It was 4 drinks, and I got a drink holder for them all. It would take me a little over 5 minutes to walk to the apartment where I was delivering to. So as I was walking, I first went down this pretty busy area in the city. I was walking along the sidewalk, then I would take a right and walk another few blocks. On this first road, I was on the sidewalk when all of a sudden I heard this noise. It was like a commotion to my left coming from the street. The next thing I knew, I was hit by a biker and knocked off my feet. I fell to the ground, and it all happened so fast. It turns out that a car turned onto the street from the left and cut somebody else off. That person swerved to avoid them, and there was a biker in the bike lane on the far right at the same time. So the biker swerved to avoid the car and went up the curb onto the sidewalk and right into me. Everybody was okay, but I dropped all the drinks and they spilled on the ground. After staying at the scene for a couple of minutes until things were sorted out, I walked back to the smoothie place. I told them what happened, and they said they would remake all the drinks. Unfortunately, this would delay me quite a bit. It ended up taking probably 15 minutes longer than it should have. When the drinks were done, I walked to the address and made the delivery. I explained what happened, but apparently the person didn't believe me, because when I arrived, there was an angry man standing just inside. He started instantly yelling at me for being so late. I told him that I literally got wiped out by an accident and had to go back and get more smoothies. He said that was lies and I was just lazy. I just left after that as he was still yelling at me. I didn't want to stay and get in a shouting match with the guy. It wasn't worth my time. I made the delivery and now I could move on. So I decided to make one more delivery to end on a good note and then call it a night. After I left the guy's apartment building and got back out onto the sidewalk, he followed me out. He stopped yelling at me, but I remember I heard the door open and footsteps behind me. He was a ways back, but I looked over my shoulder and saw him angrily walking in my direction. I ignored it and kept going. I got the last delivery for a McDonald's order, which was not that far away. The longer I walked though, the more surprised I became that the angry guy was still following me. When I arrived at the McDonald's, he was still there. I picked up the order I was to deliver and then left. The man didn't go inside the McDonald's, but he was on the street a ways away when I left it. I started walking to make the delivery, and he started walking behind me once again. When I was on a sidewalk in a kind of busy area a couple of minutes later, I decided to confront him. This was just too weird and really uncalled for. I stopped and turned around. When I did, the guy then turned and went inside of a building, which was a convenience store. Clearly, he was just going in there to make it look like he wasn't following me or something. When he did that though, I just kept walking to the address of my delivery. After that though, I didn't hear the man again. When I got to the address, which was another apartment building, I looked around and didn't see the guy. I completed the delivery and then started walking back home. It was certainly a crazy night, but I was glad that I could go home now. From there, it was about a 15-minute walk back to my apartment building. For the first 5 minutes or so, everything was fine. But then, I heard footsteps behind me again, and I looked and saw the same guy. I was shocked to see it. I didn't know where he had gone and how he had caught up to me again. Either way, he was back and walking about 100 feet behind me. I kept going towards my apartment, looking over my shoulder every so often. He stayed the same distance back. Eventually, I made it to my building. I quickly went inside and up to my place. When I got inside, I looked out and saw the guy trying to enter. Then he walked away and left. I still can't believe he followed me for so long. I used to deliver for Uber Eats sometimes. It was something that I did mostly on the weekends to earn some extra money. I would make deliveries in my car all around the city that I lived in. One night, I was working like any other. It was a little bit later though. I got a delivery, which was from a nearby local restaurant. I drove there, picked up the order, and then left. It took me just a little more than 5 minutes to reach the address where I was delivering to. It was in a pretty large neighborhood that had lots of houses in it. I parked on the side of the street in front of the house that I was supposed to deliver the food to. Then I got out of my car. When I did, I saw that it was pretty dark and quiet on this street. There weren't really any other cars driving down, and nobody else was outside. That wasn't a big surprise though at this hour. I walked up through the front yard to the front step of the house and then rang the doorbell. After I did, I looked around and noticed that a man was walking down the street a ways away. He was heading in the direction where I was. The owner of the house then answered the door, and I handed him the food. Then I turned and left to go back to my car. I walked back through the yard and then got inside of my vehicle. That's when I saw the guy who was walking down the street approaching me in my mirror. I started my engine, and just after I did, the man stopped at my driver's window. He then knocked on it. I rolled down the window, wondering what he wanted. The man was average height, kind of skinny, and had long, stringy blonde hair. He leaned in almost at my window and was kind of too close for comfort. The guy said that he needed a ride from me. I told the man no, I was working. I was just about to roll my window back up, and out of nowhere, he just punched me. It took me by surprise, and I wasn't knocked out, but it really hurt. The next thing I knew, he reached all the way in my driver's window and grabbed my car keys out of the ignition, turning the engine off. Then he took the keys. I was just recovering from the punch at this point and sort of dazed. The punch had got me in the left jaw mostly. He then opened up my driver's door. I got out on my own because I just wasn't in a mood to try to fight this guy. He already had an advantage having my keys and already landed a good punch on me. I also didn't know what else he was capable of. I just took off running in another direction. Then the guy got into my car and drove away. I did still have my cell phone with me, and of course I took it out and called the cops. I waited for them on the sidewalk, and by the time they arrived, obviously the guy was long gone. I told them everything that I could, and I got my jaw looked at. Luckily, all I needed was some ice for it. Several days later, the police located my car, abandoned on the other side of town in a mall parking lot. And several days after that, the man that stole it and punched me was apprehended. I'm really glad that my crazy experience had a good ending to the story. Back in the day, I delivered on Postmates for a while. Postmates is a food delivery app if anybody doesn't know. This was in 2017 or 18, I believe. During that time, I lived right in the city and rode my bike just about everywhere. In fact, I didn't even have a car. I would also use my bike to deliver for Postmates. It was a great way to get some exercise and make some money as well. My favorite times to work were on nights and weekends, and I made pretty good money. I remember that one time I was working at night and I got a delivery at about 10 o'clock. I don't remember exactly where it was from, but after I picked up the food, I had to ride a few blocks over to a bit of a quieter area. By now, most of the streets were pretty quiet anyways. It was a street with lots of smaller houses on both sides. I remember that I pulled into the small driveway, got off my bike with the bag of food. Then I walked up, left it on the step, and rang the doorbell. After that, I headed back to my bike and got on. When I rode back down the driveway, I saw this other guy riding a bike in the street, and the entire street was so quiet, it was strange to see. The man riding was wearing a suit and tie and sunglasses. It looked very weird. He was slowly riding towards me. After I left the driveway, I rode away, and when I turned, I went down another street. I thought that I was way ahead of the guy, but I soon heard a bike bell behind me. I looked over my shoulder and saw the guy in the suit riding a ways behind. It sort of creeped me out a little bit because it was just a really strange sight. I kept riding and went back into the city. After like 5 minutes, I happened to look back again and saw that the guy was still following me. This was so weird, and I decided to be done working and just go home. I lived in an apartment in the city about 5 more minutes away, so I started to ride there. Now I had to turn several more times, and I tried to ride my bike faster to maybe get away from the man. but after making it most of the way back, he was still there. I was so weirded out by this guy. I didn't want to stop and ask him what he was doing. I kept going, and soon I arrived at my street. There were several apartment buildings and businesses on it, but it was pretty quiet at this hour and the businesses were closed. I rode my bike right up to the front, then got off of it and quickly attached it to the bike rack. I was good at doing this fast. When I did though, I watched the man in the suit ride up. I thought he might get off of his bike or say something to me, but he didn't. He just seemed to ride past me on the street, but he looked over at me as he did. Then I turned and went inside of my apartment building. I was relieved, but still very confused by it. I went up to my place on the 3rd floor, and then went into the living room and looked out of my window. This window overlooked the street out front. When I did, I saw the same man in the suit again. He was still riding his bike and occasionally ringing the bell. I could hear it because my window was cracked open a little. I kept watching him. The guy was slowly riding his bike and just kind of going back and forth. It was like he was riding laps on the street in front of my building. I watched him for probably 15 minutes. I went away for a bit and came back, and he was still there. I closed my window and covered it and tried not to look. But sometime later, I couldn't help myself, and I looked again. This time, the man was finally gone. So he rode his bike around the street out front for about 30 minutes at least. It was really weird. I still don't know who he was or what he was doing. When I was in high school, I worked for a sandwich shop in my city. It was my very first job I ever had, and I was just 16 years old. Mostly, I would help out by sweeping the floors and things like that, but I also did the deliveries. I had a newer car that was my parents', but they let me drive it, so it was very reliable. I would make deliveries for the sandwich shop, which didn't come in all that often. We'd maybe get like 1 delivery order an hour or so, if that. It was much more common for people to just come in and get the sandwiches or pick them up. But one night, when things were pretty quiet, we got a delivery order at like 10 p.m. The sandwich was made, and then I got it and headed out to make the delivery. I got into my car and put in the address. I remembered that it was about 10 minutes away. I knew the area decent, but not all that well, because I was still a pretty new driver. This was a neighborhood that I had never been to before. It was an apartment complex that looked kind of old and run down. I parked on the side of the street and walked over to it. The apartments opened up to the outside, and I looked at the unit numbers. I followed them until I got to the one that I was delivering to. It was on the far end and a ways away from where I parked. Here, things were very quiet, and I rang the doorbell next to the door. When I did, nothing happened for a while. I figured that maybe the doorbell was broken or something, so I then knocked on the door. A little bit of time went by, with still no answer. Then, suddenly, the door swung open, but nobody was there. Whoever opened the door must have been behind it the entire time, and then went around the corner after opening. I really didn't know what was going on. I looked inside, and it was very dark. There appeared to be a kitchen right inside, but I could hardly see anything. Not a single light seemed to be on inside. There was no way that I was going in there. I announced that the sandwich delivery was here. Nobody responded to me though. After not hearing or seeing anything for probably another minute, I walked closer. I just took like 1 step into the kitchen. I looked around, still seeing nothing, and then asked if anybody was there. Still, there was no answer. I also didn't hear or see anything. But then, out of nowhere, I heard a really creepy laugh coming from inside. It sounded like a deliberately creepy laugh. I couldn't tell where it was coming from. I backed away, feeling really creeped out. I kept standing there, not really knowing what to do. Then I heard more of the laughing. It was just so creepy sounding. And then I finally heard someone speak. A deep voice said, "Come in." The voice sounded like it was fake, like it was put through a voice changer to be really deep. That's what really freaked me out. I just set the sandwich on the ground in front of the doorway and then ran all the way back to my car. I drove back to the restaurant and paid for the sandwich with my own money. I didn't want to tell my boss about what happened. Looking back, he probably would have been fine with it and understood because he was a really nice guy. But I was too embarrassed to admit that I was just scared off. I mean, I never saw anyone and I wasn't threatened or anything. I was just really freaked out and I was young. That was my scariest experience working there.